No problem. I'm gonna pause the recording. We're all set.
Okay. Okay, cool. Hello, everyone. I'm going to get the talk started. My talk is called Coding with Confidence. And my name is Michael Dimmitt, and happy to have you all here and the people joining remotely. So without further ado, let's dive in. I like to start off my talks with a news slide, something fun and exciting. One of the themes in this talk is hot. So I say hot off the press, but the hot has a meaning there. And this talk has had a lot of iterations. It used to be very opinionated. It still kind of is opinionated. Some people have found it helpful. I've run it by some people, gotten some feedback, and hopefully you come away with this talk and have something valuable. I think everyone here will benefit. And hello. Okay, so who am I? I'm Michael Dimmitt, and I've been doing React since 2017, which React is like 2015, 2016 era. So I've been doing React for quite some time relative to that coding web framework. My links. Oh, yeah, I just have some social links here. And this is me at Roundbird Coffee Shop, which I go to every Monday for Code and Coffee as the organizer. Okay, so in order to code with confidence, we're going to want to stay out of the dark wherever possible. And one of the ways that we're going to do that is by building maps. And maps have a lot of characteristics. They let you know where you are. They're easy to correct. Ideally, they articulate the rules related to reality. So you want to, and they're a communication tool, right? I have my map, you might have your map, or you might speak to my map, and we're able to mesh on a level of understanding. Maps can have meaning behind them, and they can tell a story by being a simplified representation of that larger terrain. In this talk, the map is going to be presenting everything in a flat structure in a visible way, so that you can do things like find what you need, but also not be left in the dark, and to speak from an intelligent place instead of guessing. So someone who, let me just minimize this. Someone who really highlights this idea of using maps is someone named Steve Shoger, who I put a YouTube video link at the bottom to his talks, where he looks at a user interface and improves it, and he does it as a designer. And the quality is very good. And one of the reasons he's so good with these challenges of working under constraints is because he's written a book on his design decisions. And they're not necessarily right, but they're his decisions. And so I read his book, and I didn't necessarily agree with everything. I agreed with most of it. And he even had decisions that I had never even thought of, like when to use the EM, like a valid case for using EM, the CSS property. I always use REMs or pixels. And he had this take on when you're doing something related to fonts. And I'm not going to dive into that, but it's just nice to see that people have like stands on issues. And along with that book, he made a design system that fit all of those principles. So when he's coming, like I don't have a screenshot of a design system, but designers walk around with these, and they basically show the color palette, they show all the controls, they show what we're about to build, and they're able to show it to a stakeholder or a client, and they're able to get feedback on it. And get buy-in to make sure it's what the client wants. And they're able to tweak it as needed. So they can give a stakeholder or client their own design system, which is like a modification on their core design system that it shifts in some different way. But it's not just informed by client's perception and ego. It's also can be informed by reality, by metrics, by usability tests and users interacting with the website. So what happens in his video is that he doesn't actually have contact with the client. Now, this makes it a degree more difficult because you know you have a broken website. How do you make smart decisions, smart informed decisions? Well, because he has the design system that has all that industry knowledge baked in, he has something to fall back to. So he can get like a high level, this is what we want to do. And then he can deal with that constraint of not being able to interact with the client. He would be even better if he worked directly with a client. So I'm talking about mental maps, and like a personal design system helps to inform his decisions. So if we were to move away from design and think about how do we do this as developers? How do we do this as architects? How do we do this in the technical space? Well, we need to figure out first what we need to map. And what we need to map is usually around decisions. And one way that you can map decisions is with architecture decision records. And there's a command line tool called ADR tools, which lets you say, I'm making a decision on choosing this CSS framework, for example. And later we decide that we're going to use a different CSS framework. Well, it's not a separate decision. That decision is superseded by another decision, and it creates a thread. So now, instead of having a bunch of decisions, we're starting to have like core decisions that we can kind of track. And this allows us to see what we might put in our map. But an ADR is not a map. And ADRs are actually quite frustrating for people because they seem disorganized. And that's specifically because it's not like the knowledge base all visible at a glance. And what we're trying to do here is think about how to keep everything in the light and how to make everything kind of visible at a glance. But an ADR will help you understand what you're picking and why you think that what and how that what applies to your why. I'll come back to that later. Okay, so these are some decisions that pop up when you're building a front-end React project. And some of the libraries are listed on the right side. So I might be dealing with forms. I might be dealing with Formic or React Hook Form in order to achieve that objective. What I noticed is that I end up building the same solutions over and over again. And I might change tools, but yeah, I'm constantly building similar things. And the question becomes, can I do better? So here we get into like maps in depth. And when I was explaining this to someone, they said, oh, so what you're doing here is changing the zoom level. And I said, that's absolutely right. So if you think about this slide, a map in my definition is the widest zoom level. And then a funnel is the zoom level smaller than that. And then we get to the manual level, and then we get to the guide level. So what I want to do with maps is at a glance know all the items. I want to know, this is sometimes called a taxonomy or a classification system. I want to know at a glance what's going on. Then I have a funnel, and I want to set up funnels for each of my decisions. I want to have a single mapping document where I might do things like manage dates. So if I'm formatting dates, I want all those in like a single file that I'm using a library, bringing them into that single file, and then exporting them out of that file and using them throughout the code base. It allows me to have that centralized structure, and it allows me to keep like standards up. It's the same at the map level, managing assets. I might have my images, colors, icons, all visible so that when I talk to a designer who has a design system, I can compare and make sure that the icons they're suggesting exist in my code base and that I'm not bringing a duplicate in. And we can also keep the quality up so we can look one-to-one and see, okay, yeah, we fit that standard. Now we get into manuals. So manuals are quite interesting. Someone creates the manual, probably someone who created the library, and they have a conceptual model of what their tool does and how it should be used. And then you have the system image, which is the how it currently is, regardless of how they intended to have it designed. And then you have the user's conceptual image of the thing and what they use it for, and their own conceptual model of how it works. And you might read a manual many different times and understand things differently, and you don't necessarily think of the solution the way that the creator of the library intended. And then a guide is not a manual. It's usually a defined process, a way of doing something. If you think about setting up a pattern, a way of doing things within your team and organization, that's setting up a guide where they do all of these steps, and at the end of the day, it'll just work. Guides can have a lot of kind of nuances going on, and a lot of people find guides helpful for getting started, for interacting with new libraries. All right, so an example of a map. This is a map I built at a company that I worked at, where the designers were giving us colors, but they weren't organized, and it led to us just grabbing and putting things in. And so I made a map to inform back to the designer what all of our colors were. And the key thing here is that all of the colors existed in one file. It's a flat file, and then they got exported elsewhere. And then the thing that you're seeing here, the map, was auto-generated. So I have a link to that. It's kind of a simple pattern. Now this is for colors. So can everyone see that? This is for colors, but the same thing can be applied to dates, can be applied to icons, it can be applied to images. You just have them in a list, and then down here, there's just a way to import it dynamically. Okay, well, it's not dynamic, but when I had SVG stuff, it was super dynamic, but this is fine. But as you can see, like, you never change this file. It just imports the stuff and it just works. So that's kind of the idea behind this particular map. Now, another form of map is like Storybook. And Storybook is where you could present to a client and have people interact with the controls and, you know, communicate back to the developer the type of details that they need. The key thing here, if you're using Storybook, is that try to have a flat file, just like I was showing with the list of colors, because I think that really serves you well. But yeah, go ahead.
So I was just going to ask specifically, what exactly is Storybook? Is it a React only tool? Can you use it with other, view frameworks?
Yeah. So Storybook doesn't necessarily live in your project. I think it can be its own folder, and it can, I believe it's not React only. I would have to look it up. think it has plugins, right? I don't have that information.
Okay.
Yeah, there we go. Right.
Use
So,
Meltkit web components.
yeah. So now you can even deploy Storybook to certain environments. It is considered a like a development environment sort of deal, but then you can expose them publicly. There are many public versions of them out there. And actually Storybook will host some public ones. I think free of charge. Okay. It might be for like the public sector. Okay, so this was like a brief foray into like what a map might look like. And then I remember I was talking about the architecture decision records and how they let you know the what and the why. Like why are we using this tool? And why we're using it is informed by what it does. So here I am re-summarizing the ADR, helping us understand the what and why. So often, like I'm called in to help with an issue where someone doesn't understand what's going on with Redux, or they don't understand what's going on with the React rendering. Something is broken, and it might even be that the main thread is blocked, and so therefore, like the animated GIF has stopped loading. So whenever I run into this situation, the best thing that I can do is ask myself, do I know all the tools? And like, what does each tool do? And there's why do I use each of these tools? But the first two questions are crucial. And you might you might the yeah, so like one sec. Yeah, so by asking yourself, like, what are all the tools around the issue, you might recognize that React is not re-rendering, but you might also recognize that React form hooks is the issue. And both could be at fault, and you might partially fix it by fixing it on the React rendering side. And it might be the incorrect solution. So often when I come into these calls, I'll have to kind of get an assessment of the situation and then help to either get them to see like what else might be going on, or come up with those ideas myself. Yeah. So one of the key things there is, as you're, making these assumptions, you want to always try to make it pass and make it fail to test those assumptions. And if you can't do that, that's kind of a red flag. And it might be what's called a code smell, like an area of the code base that you don't fully understand. So another good strategy is just to add tooling if these problems continue to crop up. All right, so here I'm going to talk about React and like the what behind it. And I put why with a question mark at the end there because everyone has a different why that they might have for their given project. And the what that you construct here might change based off your needs. So let's just dive into it. React allows us to have abstractions around the DOM and use a component model. And there's a lifecycle method around rendering. It has things like escape hatches, where you can use refs without triggering re-renders. And like you might not mess with the escape hatches because you just need to get the DOM, the abstraction around the DOM. So, and there can be more than just what is displayed here. But the point is, figure out like the situation that you're in, and if you need to learn more info about that tool, or if you need to ignore some of that info and really focus in on the like, what are we using it for? And that I've found to be helpful in troubleshooting a lot of those problems. Any questions on that? Okay. So regarding re-rendering in React, can people see the slide? Okay, maybe. So I used to always turn people who were learning React onto the bottom section to learn about the lifecycle methods from class components, which is this pink slide. Recently, there was a blog post that showed this image. This isn't my image. And this is quite interesting. It really highlights how React is intentional about when it's going to load more information to the person, to the user that is consuming it. There is like a really interesting thing at the bottom here where it says component did catch and there's no substitute. Someone was asking me, do people still code with class components in React? And this is a really interesting situation where if you need an error boundary, you actually would code that in a class component because you need that lifecycle method to do that. Now there is an abstraction around it that's an NPM library that you use for error boundaries, where you wouldn't need to make your own custom component. But I just found that to be quite interesting. All right, so here's an example where it never hurts to reread the manual, and you shouldn't feel bad about that. So the arrow that I'm pointing at right here is where it says that you need to include the key with the field array's ID. And I was messing with React table and React form hook field array. And if you click on this link, it's like the 14th line into the API on this page. And this page is quite long, right? But it just goes to show that you shouldn't feel bad about rereading the docs. And as a developer, you should read the docs and then a few weeks later, read them again. So, yeah. And this actually helped fix a re-rendering issue that was occurring with React table, or yeah, React table. And the person who was experiencing the bug, they were incorrectly blaming React table for the issue. So we had to really write out all the options of what could be going on and then tackle them independently. Okay, so I've just talked about React, covered like rereading the manual. I wanted to quickly touch on storage, global storage, and different ways to do it in React. This is something that someone had mentioned I talk about. So here, I want to talk about the what, but I want to talk about it in the simplest terms possible. So right here, I say we have Redux, and then down below, I say we have use reducer and use context, which is Redux, but simpler. And down below, there's a library called ZooStand, which is the hook use reducer, use context example, but simpler still. So I have a link to that one, and I have a link to a blog post where they talk about how Redux is still relevant. And what they highlight is that Redux is a state management system where you are able to use tooling and know what's going on with your data at any given time. And use reduce or use context pattern, it allows you to wire something up yourself. When you use Redux, you're also wiring something up yourself, but you do have some tooling that helps to police you, and you could still get lost in the complexity and make issues in Redux. But I would definitely lean into the tooling if I was dealing with Redux. MobX is quite interesting. It's a little bit different of an approach. It allows you to store things as what's called observables, and it's its own state management system. And as long as you are at the edges of the observables, you're able to see the values. And there's this auto run function, which can be used to look at the changes, look at whenever the observable changes and run a function at that time. So that's a really powerful function in MobX. And this is just kind of like a starting place. So if you were to call me in and need help on something, this is what would be in my head. And then I would build from there, right? So you don't know all of the what always when you start, and you might build it up and strengthen it. And you're not always going to be at the top of your game, like immediately in that moment. So yeah, I don't think it's healthy to feel that way either. Like you should at least give yourself some time to say, okay, how long are we going to have this meeting? Are we going to be able to answer it in that amount of time? So you can be a little bit strategic about how you solve these problems. All right, so I've kind of alluded to it with that time reference. Now I want to talk about like knowing terms, and knowing terms cold, knowing terms warm, and knowing terms hot. So when you know something cold, this is what you immediately think of when you're answering a question for someone. It's what you reach for when you're solving a problem, and it didn't take any prep. And so it's the what that you initially write down. When you know something warm, you know the thing that you might need to look up. You know that you need to improve at that thing. And so you go and level up your knowledge and are able to put together a solution very quickly. Today, I worked with someone and I knew that we should look for a self-executing JavaScript expression, iffy. And we did a quick search. We found the syntax and we pasted it in, and everything worked. And it was a great day. This would be a warm term situation. And then you have hot terms. Hot terms is if we're doing something esoteric, or if we're doing something we don't do often, and it's not worth keeping in our head. This might be building an authentication system, and just the part that's assigned to us, and someone's going to take it over after we're done. We're just getting it off the ground, or adding sockets into the application. This might be something we learn, we implement, it's working. Things that we might not need to do again in the next year. This is what I would think of as like something that's a hot term. And the key thing here is like, I want to be able to find it. I want it in my map of knowledge. So I should be able to find everything from the cold terms to the warm terms to the hot terms. I should have a spot I go to. Some people would say that's Google. Some people would say it's another tool. I use what's called GitHub Awesome, which I'll cover in a second. But even things that you would consider hot terms should be in there. So here's a list of my cold terms. As I was helping someone learn development, let me make this bigger. I just did a kind of a brain dump. This is cold terms is another word for brain dump. So yeah, iffy, immediately invoked function expression. This is what I would call a warm term. I built that into the talk after my exercise today. So when I think of front end and JavaScript and some of the fundamentals, I'm going to think of the logic, the loops, the maps, the filters, the reduce. And then I want to know a quick history lesson of how promises evolved. This is something that I would want someone new to know, even if they lack the background. So I kind of wrote the story, because this is another thing that I know cold. So if this is a little unclear, basically when I got into the landscape, I was in code bases that had a huge amount of callbacks. We had callback hell, and then you get exposed to promises, and you're able to start taking some of the nested callbacks out and flatten them with .then. You're able to use async awaits, and you're able to solve a lot of those difficult logical issues. However, callbacks can still be useful. I think I have a sleep function in here that I use at the bottom. Well, it's not a sleep function, but this is an example of nested callback hell in a way, and it's just nesting callbacks and using set timeout to allow time to pass and the promise to wait. Set timeout is an interesting situation where it doesn't return a promise in its own right. So one of the ways that you would wait for that to occur is to resolve that promise at a later date. Oh, actually, in this case, since I do the resolve immediately, this does not wait. This will just immediately skip all this stuff, and it'll run the result. So if I wanted to wait for a set timeout, I would actually create a new promise which has a resolve signature, and I would pass it into the deeply nested callback. And only when that line got hit would it then resolve the promise that's higher up. And it's just an example of how callbacks could allow a set timeout to wait inside of a promise. Yeah, so how promises evolved, and then dates. People have different discussions around dates and what is a good conversation and good decisions around dates. Yeah, so this is just a quick dump of knowledge that I thought would be helpful to other team members, and I just wanted to share that with you guys today. Yeah. Any questions here? Does the idea of knowing something cold make sense, and being able to communicate that to someone else so that they now know what you know cold, and then they can communicate back what they know cold, or they could learn and fit that pattern. So it allows you to set baselines in a way, because you could say okay, these are the things I would naturally reach for. So is that something that you could live with or get to in your thought process? Okay. All right, so but now let's say we need to research some hot terms. We need to research something that we might not know, might take a few weeks to really get good at. What's our solution for that? Well, to do that, we might use a taxonomy or a classification system. So a classification system is a document where everything is present, and ideally it's auto-generated, and ideally it's curated. So GitHub Awesome fits some of these criterias. They are a curated, community-supported giant README that just has a bunch of projects. So for instance, if I look at awesome React components, we see it's just like a giant table of contents that is, you can go straight to like things related to date time pickers, auto completes. And all right, so this is helpful. Now, one thing is that we see how many people have forked it and how many people have started. We can see like how many pull requests have been merged, how many have been closed. And that being said, like, how do you know that this is any good? How do you, like, they promise curation as part of the document. They say like, we have standards that we're going to accept. Now, is it auto-generated? I would argue it is auto-generated because it's maintained by a community. So as long as the community is lively and contributing, then I would say that it is auto-generated. And you can be a part of it if it's lacking in some way. So you're able to contribute to that system. But the key thing here is you want to be able to vet that system. So if this line here, the goal is to have the document where everything's present, auto-generated, and curated. If that's the goal, then that's the metric I want to measure on. So how do I vet one of these systems? Well, I'll use SvelteKit as an example. For this presentation, I was looking up, SvelteKit is considered like batteries included because it has this library system. And I went to Reddit and there was a link for Superforms, which is like, what is a good recommended form library? So someone says Superforms 8 months ago, which is pretty recent. Someone says this is amazing. So it looks like there's some community support there. Well, that's kind of interesting. So now I'm going to come back here and this is going to become my experiment. So the first thing I did was looked it up on Wayback Machine. I don't have the link to that, but I just Wayback Machine, Superforms. Where'd it go? Okay, Wayback. Yeah, I like to look at Wayback Machine because it lets you know when that particular URL started shipping. So we see here, like it's relatively new. Like that particular URL just hit it in 2023. Now it might have been a URL before then, but that's what I'm going to go with. So, okay, that's interesting. So now I look at like the top hits on SvelteKit, awesome SvelteKit, and one's 5 months old, one's 2 years old, and one's updated last week. And they have different stars. Now that's some metrics that you can look at, but the real metric I care about is the thing that I want to look at is the hot term present, right? So I know Superforms is popular. So I would assume like it's the community's behind it. So I would assume that if this is a community supported library, that the active community would have the library. And as I looked, these two did not have it. And this one that was updated last week did have it. So this is the one I would go to if I was learning about SvelteKit and continuing on. Now, if I thought the other ones had value from other libraries, I would still look at them. If I thought they had value, then I would make a PR and I would contribute. So finding that known good library is one of the metrics I use for grading these classification systems. It's what works for me. Obviously, you have other ways to access knowledge, and there are things like the Wayback Machine. There are things like Reddit. There's monitoring Slack channels and Discord channels, newsletters. This is what I tend to use because I like something that's auto-generated, that I don't need to monitor constantly, that's in a flat structure that I can immediately come in. So let's say I go here, I can just go Superforms, and right there it is. And I can see everything else that is form related, and I can quickly vet them, try them all out. It has a one line what mission statement. Early in my career, I used to do like tutorials point, ASP.NET when I'm preparing for a job interview, go down to like life cycle, and that's how I used to prep for any interview. So that's another strong way to do it, is just Google tutorials point and then anything, right? Like Elixir. And there's always like a great overview. And I mean, these are just people making courses. So it tells you the why behind that language or the why behind that framework. And I've always found that to be another helpful tool to use. All right, so then a good skill to have, I think, in your career is to be able to focus and look specifically at your task. And then you also want to be able to look up, around, and forward as needed. So like looking at your current task is often most important. But when a call needs to be made or something's going haywire, it's good to be able to look up and build allies. It's good to be able to look around and see what the market's doing. It's good to be able to look forward to say, what direction are we going? What are the issues in our code base? And you can apply this to delivering value, which is probably the most important thing, regardless of whether you're on the front end or the back end. You always want to think about, how do you get your paychecks and how do they get their paychecks, and who is experiencing our product, and is that a good experience? Then it kind of moves down, because that's how people interact with your product. And then you can't really see down here. It says, oh, I made it worse. Oh boy. Okay, well, I'm just gonna step away. So yeah, we just go around UI, around backend, and then architecture decisions. So you have the ability to look up at, around, and forward for each of those scenarios. I think like building allies is a really helpful thing. And it's not to use them against someone else. It's just be a helpful force to others, and try to recruit people to be a helpful force within the company and build synergies. Okay, so this is a summary for the talk. You want to speak from within the light. You want to be able to access everything from an informed perspective and at a glance. You want to think about, this is hot off the press. You want to think about cold terms, hot terms, and like how they fit on the landscape. So then maps show everything at a glance. What helps us to focus on the right things, and how to know things hot, so that you don't have to know them all the time, but you know them as needed, and you understand that it's okay. Okay, so thanks for taking the time to hear me out. So I will show like two more things. This is an example of something I learned very early in my career, related to Flexbox grid styling. And that was to just use a napkin or a sheet of paper and draw the rectangles of what you're building. A great example of this would be just opening up well, I can't, new window, here we go. So yeah, so if you go like Google, yeah, Google Maps is fine. Well, let's just GitHub. And you just inspect, just notice that everything is a rectangle, right? So take things that are complex and just break them up and think about, how does this rectangle relate to this rectangle? What is the layout that's going on? And at the end of the day, we're just building rectangles. Even if it looks like a triangle or a circle in the browser, we're just building rectangles. If you're building video games, you're just building triangles. So like these are some of the things that we think of. So just like gather all the logic requirements in the like the UI logic requirements. How is all this supposed to be laid out and interact with people? And then you can execute it in any way once you've napkined it. So that can be helpful. The stuff that you're seeing here, there are code pen links to them. And they're also documented on the Teaching Flexbox on a Napkin at Starbucks repo. For these, this is actually quite interesting. I did want to quickly show this. So what I did here, this was someone's coding challenge that they didn't pass. And so I was like, all right, let's quickly draw it on a napkin and then let's, lay it out. But what I did here that was kind of fun is I used an acronym background. And then instead of using like hex colors, I just used like the official colors that, okay, so you don't see them there, but you see, here, you'd say like crimson, and it'll just autocomplete, right? Because there are those browser defaults. So it's good to operate under constraints. It helps you from getting stuck in minutia of like, what hex color should I use? So that was kind of a fun little detail there. And with this one, I use kind of a tachyon syntax where I'm just tacking on specific, I guess you guys can't see it too well, but I'm tacking on specific class names like this A for that specific color. And then I have like a class that describes the containing div that has the same name as the item, but a lot of those don't even have any meaning. It's really the items that are tacked on that are adding the CSS in this circumstance. So that's how to build any UI. You just use a napkin. And then another thing that people typically enjoy is just understanding how margin and padding work. In a nutshell, it's all around the border. So the margin is outside of the border. And then if you think about a button, the padding is inside of the border. And that's really all there is to it. The other thing that's like really helpful with the browser is to just know the computed section. The computed section shows you that little box that I was talking about. So you can actually see the info of like how much padding is going on, how much border, and how much margin. You can see it'll also have position on here where it's aligned. And then, you should know that you can.
It's interactive too. You can click on one of those dashes, like double click on one, then you can like input like your own padding, margin, border.
Oh yeah, you can click on them and add your own border.
Double click there. Yep.
200. That's so cool. I didn't know that. Thanks, Ryan. And then, yeah, these are computed. So they'll let you know what specifically is making this change. And then you can click on it and it'll take you right to it in the style and have that element highlighted. So that can be quite useful. You can also filter and say like height, and then you can see like the breakdown. And then you can click, and this is on the body and this is on the dot markdown body here. So if I click on that, now I'm at the dot markdown body and I'm highlighting over it. So, and then you can like click on that and it'll go right to it. So those are like some helpful things.
It's
Yeah.
a little bit more intuitive than the developer tools 96.
Yeah. So I just wanted to show that to you guys. I do have like other videos that you could watch that I really enjoy. Like the Lori Voss videos from the like CEO of NPM.
Or CTO of NPM.
A former CTO. So those have always been good. Those I watched really early in my career. All these web ones are really solid for understanding how the browser works and the cost of JavaScript. is a talk that Adi Asmani's done since 2017 or longer. He does it over and over again, and that's a really helpful talk. These ones at the bottom are really helpful talks around abstractions and how you organize your code. And then I have like some books I recommend, but I'm not going to get into all of that. Oh, this is really fun. So this Taste.js to do MVC, it was, I think, championed by Adi Asmani and the Chrome team there. It is to do in every front end framework. I think it has like Ruby on Rails as well. I'm not sure, but you go to examples and there you go. You can see they're all implementing the same thing and they're all trying to have best practices. So if you ever wanted a Rosetta Stone for the web, now it hasn't been updated. Like the last one, I guess 2 months ago, they did a news section. I've submitted a PR here and gotten it rejected. So they don't merge everything. Some people scream like, why aren't you, this is like a valid framework, you should bring it in. But still, it's a cool resource to look at. And then this is the best URL I found for finding conferences. If you find a better one, let me know. I did vet like 4 options before finding this one. So let's see, we're at a JavaScript meetup. So 64 here. And then we're in the United States. So now we're down to 11. So React Miami, here we come. There's St. Petersburg, Florida. Okay. This seems pretty fun.
2 right here in Florida.
Yeah, look at that. And I will say New Orleans has some fantastic beignets. If you go to the New Orleans View Conf, you get some beignets. Okay. This was an article on maps, and it was they were commenting on a book called Thinking in Systems, which is a book I want to read. But there is a quote here that says, developing a shared language is crucial to communication. It's crucial to collaboration and crucial to business education. And that shared language, they're saying, is due to the fact that they're using maps and able to align. Okay. So thank you. And then, yeah, I'll take questions as needed. So
I have a question on the GitHub Awesome links.
GitHub Awesome, yeah, go.
It looked like you showed like 2 awesome developments. Was one a work of the other, or are those like competing?
Yeah, sure. I believe that they're competing. I don't think they're on the official Svelte. Yeah, so here we have Awesome Svelte and then Awesome Svelte. So they're directly competing, and then Awesome Svelte Kit. But it seems like Awesome Svelte is out competing the Awesome Svelte Kit because it's actually got the libraries that the other one doesn't have.
So 2 people put like they make their own awesome. Like which one becomes the official, or is that part of the process?
Recording in progress.
Oh, were we not recording it?
Oh, no.
Or did you just stop it?
I was getting ready to stop it, but once you're finished.
What were you saying, Ryan?
Which one becomes official if there's competition?
Well, they do fight for like the parent GitHub Awesome. So GitHub Awesome comes from Syndrasaurus's main project. One thing that's quite fascinating is that on the React side, I actually put Syndrasaurus maintains the awesome Node.js one. So that's kind of fun. But most of them are maintained by different people. And so then if we look at Svelte here, he's got one listed on his page. So this is the current popular or known one. And so if you had a better library, you might submit your repo and say, hey, I have more stars than the other guy. And then if it passes muster, or if the other person is not maintaining it, then they would list this one and accept that PR. So you can directly compete and you can list your project over someone else's project by submitting a PR. But they have standards by which people get dethroned. It's not like they would just let, even if you were more popular, it's not like they would just let that win. Like if the other person's still maintaining it, it's still like a good project. So this one is the one that we picked, the computer. So that is another way to like vet this thing is this GitHub Awesome is to go here and go to the main repo, because that's the one that they're curating all the entry to all the other ones. Yeah. Cool.
Looks like you have a chat message. I don't know if someone's asking.
Oh, here we
It
go.
was just, it was about a good job on the presentation.
How did I know? Well, some of it. This is of my own, recollection. Or, creation. However, knowing something called is a term in. What do they call those? Like idiomatic, idiom?
Yes,
It's an idiom. Oh, sorry. In the English. Yeah, the autocomplete is smarter than me. It's like this.
Well, you know, I understood how you classify them, but how do you actually use it? I mean, what's the practical purpose of it?
You mean, how do I use the libraries?
No, you have this,
Yeah, okay.
it's like a knowledge base,
Yeah.
better term.
Taxonomy.
Taxonomy, right.
System.
So, in a, everyday life as a developer, how do you, actually use it? What's the
Yeah,
purpose?
so the real key here is to use it for the moments where you need to know something hot or you need to know something warm. Well, actually, when I need to know something warm, I usually go to Google. When I need to know something hot, that's when I would go to GitHub Awesome, because it lists competing libraries next to each other. And when I need to make a decision around what library to choose, and I want to quickly spin up 7 hello worlds and quickly like see, like I need to make a decision, that's when I would go to this. Let's say I'm going to an interview and they haven't published what libraries they use, but I know that they're going to be doing something with forms or payment systems. I can quickly educate myself on like what are known good packages and be prepared for any contingency. So it just allows you to have that full, like being fully informed. It's like you were saying how you've worked with people who know MobX, you've worked with people who've worked with Redux. You should know all of them, but you should know them all like in a minimal capacity, and you should be able to get along with all of the
You
different.
should have an idea what's,
What's out there.
strengths and limitations.
Yeah.
Basically.
And it also helps you, if you're feeling really frustrated with the current library, you might shop around, and this would be a great way to do that.
One of the challenges is, for example, with state management systems.
Yeah.
That it's kind of hard to find the information on,
Oh,
when you actually have to use one or the other.
so I think this might have it. Nope. Sometimes there are awesome frameworks that just have like good, resources. I'm drawing a blank on it, but yeah, like how do you know that you're using it right?
Yeah.
Some of it is inferring from usage. Some of it, like sometimes you go to the GitHub package and you look at the source code and it ends up being a pull
What I
request.
mean exactly, it's like, if you compare, for example, Redux and, that, hooks,
Mhm.
combo. unless you really dealt with it, you know that context has limitations of mm, it's not as it doesn't handle a lot of transactions basically. If you have a system that you have a lot of concurrent operations going on through your state,
Mhm.
context doesn't handle that.
Yeah,
And that's what I mean.
in
I don't know how helpful.
yeah, so I mean, there will be like really good posts on like why to use
Right.
like here they're explicitly calling out like what Redux is and like when it's useful. So often you can look at the sales pitch of the library to like
That's
help
the
see those
problem. You don't need a
details.
sales pitch. You need like use cases basically.
Yeah.
In which case if you're building a complex e-commerce application with thousands of users,
Yeah.
you need to know which to use in that case.
Okay. Let me think about how I would answer that and
Yeah.
get back to you.
I wonder if the awesome handles that, like is more.
Well, no, I mean, for the most part, it's a one-liner and it takes you directly to where
Mhm.
the library is.
It basically explains what it does, right?
A lot of the libraries like React Table, Material React Table, they'll have this concept of a basic example and a kitchen sink example where they just throw the kitchen sink. And I was thinking these past few months about informing my maps. The thing about the maps is that I actually build maps within code bases and I find them to be quite helpful. And one of the concepts I've been chewing on is like every map that I do have a kitchen sink, right? Have a kitchen sink, but also have like the very basic because it is like a pretty good pattern. And yeah, like I've used packages that don't even have documentation. They just have a kitchen sink and they just have a basic example. And when I've made a PR to like this React data grid, and I had to write the kitchen sink example. Like I had to I exposed like this uh, index for the row that they weren't passing down in the callback function, and it made it like way more useful. But you have to update the kitchen sink in the basic example as needed. And then I'm like, oh, this is great. I don't even have to update docs because there are no docs. So,
Right.
Yeah.
Thanks, Michael.
I have a question, Michael.
what you got?
So one thing that you brought up was when you're preparing for like an interview or you're just trying to like refresh on some kind of topic, you use these awesome lists,
Sure.
like kind of give you a good overview.
It's one of the ways I
Yeah,
level
so
up.
as an example, let's say an interview question was you're dealing with a general React application that is suffering from performance issues.
Yeah.
I think that'd be a great candidate for like using an awesome list. Is there something that you've done in the past, maybe awesome React performance?
Oh, well, usually you can Google something like that, right? So awesome React performance, and it can often take you directly to something
There you go.
where you can get information on that subject.
Just like a little weaker one then.
Yeah, we only see 16 stars, so there are some interesting items here, but you can tell that they're trying to go with that theme. There's another thing you can do, which I outlined in the talk. It's that here they just have like the awesome tag, which the GitHub awesome repo highlights, and then you can just search by like number of stars. So you can quickly see like the Python one is pretty. I guess there's a book of secret knowledge for cheat codes. That's kind of fun. Awesome Go. Let's see here. How else would I solve that? Yeah, so like if I go back, where was it? Here. And then these ones are kind of popping up. So another thing I would look for is like people. So awesome React, I would say people, follow, social. Like I know awesome Angular has it. with Patrick JS. So people, social, Twitter. Yeah, so like community. So sometimes in the awesome packages, they'll outline like who's the person to follow. So you can go follow them on Twitter. And they'll be, it's like not everyone can get on that because it's curated, right? Otherwise, I would be on there. Everyone would be on there. Yeah, so experts, right? So like if I wanted to learn about Angular, I might follow him on Twitter.
All right.
Okay.